This video was requested by Patreon supporter Kim Jensen. Thank you so much for your support. Boxing kangaroos have been around since they were a sideshow attraction in the late 1800s. The one we are discussing is the one from 1982, which, believe it or not, starred in his very own self-entitled game, Kangaroo. What is the backstory behind the creation of this arcade game? So put on your gloves and don't wait for the bell, because this is the history of Kangaroo. The year is 1982 and Sun Electronics designer Hideo Suzuki is looking for ideas for his next arcade game. He had spent some time in America on vacation and fell in love with an early 1982 release called Zookeeper. In the game, you take on the role of Zeke, a lonely zookeeper who has to rescue his girlfriend Zelda from all the escaped animals. The goal of the game is to build a cage around the animals, all the while avoiding certain death. Mr. Suzuki thought the game was great, but noticed there was one missing marsupial. He decided to base his new game solely around a kangaroo who was attempting to rescue her Joey. Throw in some crazy monkeys and a pink kleptomaniac boxing gorilla, and you've got the basis for Kangaroo. The ATARI Corporation was looking at all of their arcade games in development and noticed they did not have any platform games that were similar to Donkey Kong. Wanting to strike while the fire was hot, they scrambled to get something to release to appease their shareholders. They set their sights on Japan, and more specifically the Sun Corporation, which had developed Kangaroo. The Sun Corporation did not have any presence in the States, so this was perfect for Atari. In no time at all, a deal was struck and Atari had their next big arcade hit. Kangaroo was developed by Sun Corporation in 1982 and distributed by Atari. You take on the role of a mama kangaroo who is trying to rescue her kidnapped Joey from the clutches of the evil fruit-throwing monkeys. So how do you deal with monkeys that are being just downright naughty? You punch them right in the face, of course. You are equipped with a pair of boxing gloves to defend yourself against the maniacal monkeys. The comparison to Donkey Kong is pretty evident, from the entire rescue theme to climbing the ladder to jumping over the apples. The monkeys at the top of the screen will also throw down rotten apple cores similar to the wild barrels Donkey Kong would toss from the top. With that being said, there's still enough originality for the game to stand on its own. The controls are pretty straightforward, with your primary offense being a punch button. The monkeys will throw apples overhand and underhand. Depending on how they are thrown, sometimes you either have to duck or jump to avoid them. If the apples that are thrown are in line with your boxing glove, you can punch them. Speaking of jumping, rather than use a separate button for jumping, you have to press up on the joystick. You also have to use a super leave, which is diagonal up and either left or right. This is mandatory when it comes to later levels to jump across the huge gaps. You will notice various fruit hanging from limbs which can be collected for a point bonus. Something else you will notice is a large bell on each level. If you ring this, the fruit will change and the point value will be higher. If you take too long to complete the round, a giant pink boxing gorilla will appear and steal your gloves. It is possible to punch him off the screen, but if he steals your gloves, you are defenseless against your enemies. If you manage to make it to the top and rescue Joey, he lets out a giant mom, and you proceed to the next level. As I mentioned, there are 4 levels in total, with each varying in difficulty. Once you make it through all 4 boards, the game repeats at a higher difficulty. After you complete each board, the song "Oh Susanna" is played. The background music is the folk song "American Patrol." The song that is played when you hit the bell is "Westminster Chimes." The game was a critical and financial success, selling over 9,000 cabinets. Kangaroo was even popular enough to find its way via animated form to the Saturday Supercade cartoon.
Joey Kangaroo. Katie in the zoo. Monkey making mayhem, boo-boo, bad but best friends. Bingo, bango, bongo, Fred. This monkey business coming at you. So rock 'em, sock 'em, knock 'em, Kangaroo forever. So Kanga happy, Joey and Katie. K.O. cuckoo crazy, cuckoo kangaroo.
Despite the arcade game's success, there weren't that many conversions. Only 3 were produced, and all for the Atari systems. The first one we are looking at is the Atari 2600 version. Upon first glance, this is definitely not my Kangaroo. For starters, there is a whole lot of flicker going on. Graphically, the game sort of resembles the arcade game, but the backgrounds are very sparse. We now have magical fruit that hangs from invisible lines as there are no tree limbs to be found. The game does feel like the arcade game though, with nice tight controls and smooth animation. The sound effects and music are very good as well. The game only contains 3 out of the 4 boards. Also, the pink kleptomaniac boxing gorilla is also missing. Overall though, it's a pretty good conversion. The Atari 5200 version is up next, and now we're talking. The graphics look very close to the arcade game with large detailed sprites that are well animated. Aside from the boxing gorilla, everything from the arcade game is here. The sound effects and music are very well done. The playability is nice and tight, and the gameplay is fast and smooth. This version also contains all 4 boards as well. This version was also released for the Atari 400 and 800 home computer line. This version is very similar to the 5200 version with slightly muted colors. The sound effects and music are very good, along with nice, tight controls. And that wraps up the history of Kangaroo. The game is one of those forgotten gems that came out just before the big video game crash of 1983. It was always a favorite of mine growing up, and even though it's similar in style to Donkey Kong, it's still, overall, a great little game. Be sure and check it out if you haven't already. If you like my videos and want to support me on Patreon, please click the link below.